week here on IG and now on YouTube. Thank you very much for joining me. Talk Live. Let's go to the full cam here. Yes, indeed, dear. We are back and we are live. And thank you very much for joining me in Talk Live. As you can clearly see, I am in a celebratory mood. Not for the Arsenal, Lord knows, but they'll do their magic in due course. But what I am so celebratory about are my Bills, baby. Off to the AFC Championship, first time in about 4 or 5 years. So, congrats to them. They played one hell of a game on Sunday against the Baltimore Ravens, and shout out to Lamar Jackson and et al. And yeah, it was a very, very good game. Went down to the wire, and we slayed King Henry and his minions, and Lord knows, yeah, we need to take down Mahomes. You're right, Vladizoo. You're right, Vladizoo. Shout out to you, Vladimir. Vladizoo, yes, sir. Thank you so much for your support. As you can see, I'm wearing the authentic gear from my Bills mob, from the Bills mob here, and I'll be wearing it again this Sunday. So we're gonna get into that a little later on. But I wear this tonight. Shout out to the Bills, Gold Bill Mafia, and Gold Bills period. Yeah, I'm looking forward to get down to a game really, really soon. Probably next year, definitely, since there are no more hornbeams left, ladies and gentlemen. But again, I will welcome a Super Bowl in due course. But anyways, let's get to it. Let's get to it here on Talk Live on IG and YouTube. Like, subscribe, comment on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And again, sponsored by Duntalk, DUNTLK.com. Right. As I have in the background, the Raptors are doing some serious work against the Orlando Magic, to be fair. Playoff team. I don't know. Raptors can come up with their own magic from time to time, but on the other days of the week and of the month and of the NBA schedule, they lay a huge flat down egg. But anyways, nonetheless, it looks like they're gonna win against the Orlando Magic tonight, and that'll be a big pick me up. Actually, it's a bit of a stomp. Yeah, a bit of a storm, or a bit of a overwhelming win tonight. But anyways, let's get into this on Talk Live here on IG and YouTube. Like, subscribe, comment on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Let's get into this one. Yes, indeed. Donald J. Trump, Donald John Trump was the 45th and now the 47th president of the United States, and he was inaugurated yesterday. And what I want to do today, and he's made a lot of very, very inflammatory and jingoistic and saber-rattling comments with regards to what he feels about Canada and how Canada is indeed the 51st state, and Governor Trudeau is living on borrowed time, as Canada will soon be taken over by the United States by force or otherwise. So tonight I thought I'd go into it. Now we are here. Now we are within the Trump administration and his many pardons and his many activities of and many jingoistic activities in terms of kicking out terrorists and immigrants and lowering taxes and drill baby drill and all the rhetoric and getting to end the Israel Hamas war, and he's talked about all these things, and he's basically trying to shout from the rooftops that his administration will be the greatest administration seen by the United States in its history. So, old Trump fair, to be fair. But again, we're here to focus on Canada and what he's trying to do to Canada. Soon come watching Raptors finish off Orlando. Yes, indeed. Raptors are indeed finishing off Orlando. It's a good night for the Raptors, to be fair. But let's get into this, ladies and gentlemen. What I want to do is get into the little bits and bites of what Trump plans on doing to Canada, and the main plan in particular is to inflict tariffs on Canadians and the Canadian government and Canada period, in terms of any sort of imports to the United States, because they feel they're not paying their fair share in terms of monies back to the United States, and not only that, but their fair share in NATO, which Trump has gone on record to say that Canada is limiting its funding on NATO initiatives and its attendance and its membership in NATO, and it's coming to a point where he wants Canada to pay back its and to pay back and to give of itself to the United States and maybe even indeed become the 51st state. But let's get into this, ladies and gentlemen. We're off to the browser here, and we're gonna be relying on the one and only world famous Canadian Broadcasting Company for a lot of our info here tonight on Talk Talk Live. Let me just get back to share the screen here on YouTube. You can join me on YouTube, but you can join me on Instagram tonight. But this is something that I wanted to get out there. Where are we here? There we go. Bang. Got it. Yes, indeed. So the first video from CBC News and About That series. About that is their sort of online series with regards to topics of the day, current news, current affairs, and it is quite. It's a nice bite-sized version of CBC News that people can see and view and digest in bite-sized chunks. Of course, the 10 minutes holding pattern that'll keep people's attention throughout the video. So, they have two very good videos here, which we'll feature tonight. The first one tonight is Trump right about U.S. subsidizing Canada? So we're going to, first off, shout out to Lana BK. Vlad, there's a shout to you there. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Trump. Is Trump right about U.S. subsidizing Canada? So keeping Canada afloat. So let's get started with this as we get to the full cam here. And, the thing about Canada and the United States is the fact that we have a shared culture pretty much. We have shared values. We share, even sports teams, as we see here. A lot of our Canadian sports teams play in North American leagues. And, with all that in mind, and, we share, economic views, we share, entertainment, we share with a lot of our Canadian citizens making it big in the United States. We share a lot of again sports teams, a lot of commodities, a lot of raw materials, and it's a really famous relationship, one of the more famous in the world, Canada and the U.S. And Donald Trump wants to assert his authority on said relationship. But let's break that relationship down now and ask the question: is Trump right about the U.S. subsidizing Canada? So let's get into this. Thank you very much for joining me on Talk Talk Live.
Governor Trudeau, I said, listen, what would happen if we didn't subsidize you? Because we give them a lot of money. It's very unfair.
But what does Trump mean exactly? Subsidizing Canada to the tune of over $100 billion a year. And is it true? We should start by saying that everyone is partly guessing what Trump means when he talks about the U.S. subsidizing Canada, because he hasn't actually explained where he's getting this $100 billion number from. And the number sometimes changes with a whole bunch of other grievances getting thrown into the pot.
Why are we supporting a country, $200 billion plus a year? Our military is at their disposal. All of these other things, they should be a state.
But let's pick up on what appears, at least most of the time, to be driving this claim about the U.S. subsidizing Canada. And that's the trade imbalance between the two countries.
Donald Trump has always been obsessed with trade balances, trade surpluses and deficits, and the fact that the U.S. has a trade deficit.
We're spending hundreds of billions a year to take care of Canada. We lose in trade deficits.
A trade deficit happens when country A imports more from country B than it exports. And Trump's right on one central point. The U.S. does have an ongoing trade deficit with Canada. And that's been the case for years. Canada has, in fact, sold more goods to the United States than the U.S. has sold to Canada. And zooming in on 2023, for example, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the hard numbers are pretty clear. Canada exported $427 billion worth of goods to the US, while the US exported $355 billion worth of goods to Canada. The difference between those two numbers, about 72 billion US, or about 100 billion Canadian.
He talks about.
So
I'm a
again,
trader, I love
I'll just
trade.
stop there. I'll just stop there for a second. That's one thing that a lot of people in the United States don't really get. A lot of people in Canada don't really get. In that, you would assume that Canada takes more from the States, when actually it's the other way around. The United States takes more from Canada, and you'll find out what that of what that is. But yeah, we the U.S. is sending more money to us than we are to them. But that's as you will see, the case in most of its trade relationships throughout the world. And you'll find out why in a bit. But again, just to let you know, indeed, Canada is running a trade surplus with the United States. The United States is running a trade deficit with Canada. Let's continue.
I want so much trade, but it has to be fair. But what he means by fair is that if the U.S. has a surplus, it's fair. If the U.S. has a deficit, it's unfair.
So maybe that's where Trump is getting this $100 billion figure from. Except if that's the case, it's misleading. Because what I just showed you was the trade deficit in goods, physical things. But think of all the other things that Americans sell to Canadians, from financial services, telecommunications, air transport, consulting, hell, even Netflix.
It's very important to look at services as well, because services has been a growing part of trade for many decades now.
Yes.
So again, Canada and the United States are very, very intertwined in terms of goods, in terms of services, in terms of, and also in terms of literal services that are in terms of goods, services, in terms of travel, in terms of entertainment, in terms of everything. We are such an intertwined economy with the United States. It's inextricable. It's inextricable. So therefore, it's basically you can't untangle it. We need each other now more than ever before. And for Trump to say that he wants to sever that and make the United States a little more trade unfriendly is a bit of I wouldn't say a bit of a slap to the face, but it sours the relationship between ourselves and the United States, which is which can be indeed be problematic. But I think it's the United States are quite sore about the relationship between our, including definitely Donald Trump. They're quite sore of the relationship between Canada and the U.S. and that the U.S. is basically doing a lot to prop up our economy because they're buying our goods, they're buying a lot of our services, and that's why we are running a trade surplus. Let's continue.
Any honest accounting of a trade imbalance must take services into account, because that's trade. And when you look at that balance sheet in services, the US actually has a surplus over Canada of about $32 billion US, which doesn't wipe out the deficit in goods, but it certainly pulls the two countries a little closer together. The actual total trade imbalance between Canada and the US is about $40 billion US, or 57 billion Canadian, in Canada's favor. But
and believe me, a lot of his, billionaires that were at his inauguration yesterday, they very, very, very much welcome the Canadian addition to the revenues they receive. And, they don't want that to end. They definitely don't want that to end. And they wouldn't have gone to Donald Trump asking for that to end. They are selling services from Google to, goods in terms of Tesla, but from Google to Amazon to Netflix to Facebook. All these are American services. All these are American American ideas and novel ideas that they are selling back to us, in which we are taking in at a great rate, and that evens it sort of evens the balance sheet between, in terms of the trade deficit, giving more to the United States than they do to Canada. However, it's still, an overwhelming surplus towards Canada, something that Donald Trump doesn't really like, and he would like to, threaten in order to gain a certain advantage in terms of trades and services to Canada, because he doesn't like to lose. Period, as can clearly be seen. Let's continue.
Set aside the number because, like I said at the start, I don't know if it's clear to anyone where Trump is getting his numbers from because he hasn't explained it, even when asked. But there is a bigger question here about how Trump appears to be framing the trade imbalance as some sort of subsidy to Canada.
And so I think he's saying implicitly, we're giving more dollars to Canada than they're spending in the U.S. And he thinks that's a subsidy.
He's just saying the very fact that there's a trade deficit shows that we must be subsidizing things in some fashion. And that's not the case.
Right, because when we think of subsidies, we tend to think of handouts, right? Except it's not like the U.S. is just sending Canada $40 billion a year for nothing in return. Like when I buy a $6 jar of mayonnaise from Walmart, that's not a subsidy. I'm buying mayonnaise. And Americans are simply buying more from Canada than Canadians buy from Americans. And experts we spoke to say that's not necessarily a bad thing.
There's nothing inherent.
And yeah, it's listen. He's saying that they're subsidizing us, and Trump is saying he's subsidizing the Canadian economy. He's not. They're just literally buying more from us. They need more of our goods and services than we need of theirs. So therefore, that's the reason for the trade deficit. That's what's pissing Trump off so much, is the fact that they need they are in need of us more than we are in need of them, for the most part. But the fact of the matter is, it's such a harmonious relationship that we really don't, see it as such. But Trump does, of course, because he always wants to see himself as a ruler, dictator, and forever president, quite simply. And he doesn't like to lose. And what he's doing, what he sees in terms of the trade deficit is that he's losing to Canada. He doesn't like losing, so therefore he's threatening in order to sort of even the playing field. But again, that's the reason why, as we'll see later, why different premiers and the prime minister here are talking tough, because they realize too that without what we give them, there'll be serious consequences. So we'll find out a little later. We have a question here from Lana BK. When do we expect the trade deficit to be higher since we have a lower population than Yeah, you would think so. When do we expect the trade deficit to be higher since we have a lower? Yeah, you expect it to be higher, yeah. But again, the United States is a huge provider of commodities themselves. They have huge oil reserves, as we'll see later, those oil reserves aren't exactly the best and the most and the highest grade of commodities like Canada's is, and that's why the Americans can indeed create can cut out this trade deficit by not buying from us, but at the end of the day, they really do need us, because without us, you'll find out the American economy really doesn't run to its great efficiency without us. Let's continue, or anyone else in the world, but definitely from us. Let's continue.
Good or bad about a trade surplus or a deficit. The United States has had a trade deficit pretty much since the end of the Second World War. Why is that? Because they're richer than any other country, so they buy more stuff.
And consider this:
great point raised there by the expert, professor there, in that. Yes, indeed. The United States is probably the richest country in the world, so therefore they can afford to buy from us. They can afford to take our goods, take our services, and and not feel any ways about it, because they can afford it. They can afford to buy our water, our lumber, our oil, or whatever else we can supply to them, our electricity, anything else we can supply to them, because at the end of the day, they can afford to do so. Their economy is was deemed as the strongest in the world, even though they're running deficits left and right to different countries. But yeah, their economy is the strongest in the world. They have, per capita the most amount of millionaires than anywhere else on the planet. So they can afford to take our goods and services quite simply and not feel too bad about it, because it's driving their economy, it's keeping them working, keeping the lights on, keeping the heat on, keeping them driving, keeping them moving, keeping their economy running. So the biggest economy in the world running. So they don't mind. They really don't mind. Let's continue.
US's $40 billion trade deficit with Canada pales in comparison to its trade deficit with many other countries. Just look at how much more the US buys from China each year, for example. That gap is more than $250 billion.
So Canada only counts for about 5.
You can see, going back to the graph, I mean, that's exactly what Trump wants to cut out. Trump wants to cut out the trade deficit he's running with China and the trade deficit he's running with the United States or anywhere else in the world, even the EU, because he realizes that they're paying a heavy price for being by being the biggest economy in the world. They're importing all of goods and services from China. Think TikTok, think Temu, think any sort of cheap value good that runs through Walmart. That is a trade deficit. You look at the EU. The goods and services that come from there, from Mexico, they're doing most of the car manufacturing from there. From Germany, car manufacturing again from Japan. That's more. That's again more in cars and electronics, and so on and so forth. Even India, but it's why it's through this because these goods and services definitely goods are made cheaper and are made cheaper and better in those countries. That's the reason why the United States will indeed take more from these outside countries than from within, because it'll be a huge cost to their work. A huge cost to American companies to have the American workforce pay for these goods and services. So they rather get it from where the economies of scale, where the where the budgets for labor are that much less. So that's why that's what you call outsourcing and the like, and again, it's even including Vietnam, Germany, all it pays to buy these services directly from said countries because they're cheaper to make and import into the United States. So let's think of that. Gidato says Trump will ultimately bankrupt America. You can't bully the whole world at once, bro. No, you can't. Well, this is it. Listen, if the United States had to manufacture all these goods and all their services themselves, they would indeed fall victim to unions and paying high prices for labor. That's why they have to outsource a lot of these goods and services to other countries to make, because they have cheaper labor. Simple as that. So, and with the U.S. having such a good economy, making only the goods and services that they relatively need to hand that they want, like such as an Amazon, such as a Microsoft, such as a Tesla, or any other service that they can shoot, any other car or any other service that they can fund directly to them. Any other goods and services that can be made cheaper outside the country, they will do it. And with the Americans having such a huge and great economy, they can afford to pay for said services from around the world without that affecting them. So, but great point there, Gidato. Yeah, listen, Trump will bankrupt his own country. Well, he'll make the cost of living so high if the goods and services were made in the United States. That's what everybody's talking about these days. Is that, yeah, okay, Trump wants to lower the trade deficit to China. But the fact of the matter is, goods and services are going to be more expensive if you make them domestically. So therefore, you are going to, render a lot of that economy to a meek existence by allowing for Americans to make products for Americans. It's been running so well by outsourcing that it would be counterproductive to do so. So very good point raised by Gidato. there. And let's continue. Let me see if there's anything on the other side there on the YouTube ranks, and we are good to go. So let's continue here on IG and YouTube. Thank you very much for joining me on Talk Live on IG and YouTube. Like, subscribe, comment on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Let's get it.
$1 billion.
So Canada only accounts for about 5% of the overall U.S. deficit just in terms of traded goods. It's not even in the top 5 countries that have a larger surplus.
But let's go one level deeper with Trump's argument, because what he's actually been trying to get across is that the U.S. doesn't actually need any of the stuff it's buying from Canada, and that it's only been buying Canadian products to essentially help Canada out. That's the subsidy.
We're doing it because of habit, and we're doing it because we like our neighbors, and we've been good neighbors. But we can't do it forever. You know, they make 20% of our cars. We don't need that. I'd rather make them in Detroit.
And it's not just cars. It's also
Lumber. We have massive fields of lumber. We don't need their dairy products. We have more than they have. We don't need anything.
So now we're starting to understand his point, that he believes the U.S. can and should produce all of these things domestically instead of paying Canada for them.
The America First movement, not just Trump, but the America First movement and the economists who are part of it are fixated on the deficit as synonymous with job loss in the U.S.
And that's certainly an argument you can make from industry to industry. If you set aside the notion that the whole reason you buy things instead of make things is because making things is often more expensive. But if Trump really believes that the U.S. buys too much from Canada, he is leaving one big thing out. The one daily purchase that makes up about a quarter of everything Americans buy from Canadians. The U.S. produces more crude oil than any other country in the world, around 13 million barrels a day. But for its own citizens, it needs more than that, about 20 million barrels a day. And it can't even efficiently use a big chunk of what it does produce, because historically, American refineries have been set up to process a different, heavier kind of oil than American drillers can find in their own shale deposits. So that's an expensive problem. But you know who produces exactly the kind of heavy crude oil America needs? You guessed it. The U.S. buys the majority, around 60% of the crude oil it needs, from Canada.
Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. I just presented this graph to you here on Talk Live. You can see it here live on YouTube. Yes, if you think that Trump and the United States and any other president or the American Republic buy most of their oil from Saudi Arabia, you're laughing. You're kidding yourself. No, they buy it from us. We are their biggest oil importer. That's really not said in the headlines. Canada is big on oil, and the Americans are the biggest consumer. This is where the trade deficit really begins and ends. Where the rubber meets the road, quite simply. Without Canadian oil, the American economy can't flourish. Simple as that. Or at least half of it can't flourish. Well, actually, 2/3 of it can't flourish, as was seen in that graph. 2/3 of the American economy can go without Canada making a huge contribution to it. And so, exactly, Lana BK says here, insert all the delightful chats about the Keystone Pipeline. Yes, the Keystone Pipeline was big to the United States. Very, very, very big. Anyhow, any pipeline that can pump, Texas tea, as it were, or Alberta ale to the United States, quite simply would be a godsend to them. To have a direct pipeline and keep the American economy running for years and years and years to come. Yes, indeed. If there's one reason why Trump would love for Canada to be the 51st state, is that it doesn't have to pay Canada for its oil. If he thought Iraq was something, yeah, where they would Iraq is 4%, as you can see, of their crude oil, another source, but you can't really invade Canada, can you? Or can you? That's the reason why Trump is saber-rattling so much, because he would love for Canada to be the 51st state and for the American economy to get all its oil literally free, and cut out about 2/3 to half of their contributors around the world, making it so much cheaper for them to run the economy. Imagine the American economy with free oil. Canada's oil. It would be the American economy on steroids. If you think the American economy is the biggest and best in the world now, if Canada gave them if Canada gave them that oil for free, exactly, it would be a bigger effort to deal with. Simple as that. So that's the reason why Trump is really so jealous, is the fact that whether you like it or not, the American economy can't run without our oil. So think about that. Let's continue.
And on some level, it makes sense. Canada is a relatively stable energy partner. Pipelines make transporting oil a lot easier.
Because of the distance, because of pre-existing supply chain links, because of transportation routes. This is why Canada and the U.S. trade the most.
And one other way to look at Canada's trade surplus.
If you remove oil, we're now running a trade deficit with the United States.
It's largely one commodity in our case. And that commodity is not putting Americans out of work. It's putting Americans to work.
Putting Americans to work. Because
think about that, ladies and gentlemen. As I just said, our oil puts Americans in their cars and gets them to work. So anytime the Americans may have a superiority complex over you, tell them this. Without us, you wouldn't get to work today. Without Canada's oil, Americans would not get to work. Most Americans would not get to work. That's the hidden secret that most people won't tell you. You would think that Canada is so dependent on the United States because of all these companies that are here. But the fact of the matter is, most of these companies can't run without our oil. Because oil and gas still holds hegemony in terms of the biggest commodity in the world in terms of allowing things to run and getting people to work and keeping an economy running and moving. So without that, the Americans are in trouble. So again, that's the reason why Trump is so pissed off, is because as stated here, without oil, we would be running a trade deficit to them. So they can't produce the oil themselves. So all this saber rattling from Trump, it falls on deaf ears, and that's the reason why Trudeau can talk tough, because he realizes too that, well, make a relax, Trump. Without our oil, you can't do shit. So that's the reason why he wants us to be the 51st state, because he doesn't want to deal with all this histrionics, and sullying the greatest undefended border in the world has ever seen. Anyways, let's continue.
of what I just mentioned a few moments ago, that there is an entire industry built around the importation of heavy Canadian crude and all the American workers who process and refine that oil domestically.
Oil and gas is probably one of the best examples of how something that is responsible for a huge trade deficit is actually creating tens of thousands of jobs in the U.S.
Now, Trump has signaled that he intends to ramp up domestic drilling, too. But to use all of that oil domestically, there would have to be a significant and expensive retooling of America's refining capacity as well. That doesn't happen overnight. So, in the meantime, Americans buy a ton of oil from Canada. And that is the single biggest driver of the trade deficit that Donald Trump says is a big, big problem.
If it were to be interrupted, I know it would harm Canada, but it also would get the attention, I think, of U.S. policymakers, because there are parts and regions of the U.S. that very much depend on those imports.
So, yes, the U.S. has a trade imbalance with Canada. No, that doesn't mean the U.S. is subsidizing Canada's economy. But yes, Trump can and will likely continue to argue that it should be buying less from Canada and producing more at home. How easy that is to actually do is one question. Another is how much of all of this is just part of one long, dramatic negotiation.
Very good there from CBC about that. Excellent work. Really, it's lays out for you all that the American still has to answer for, and they won't tell you about. So thank you very much, CBC, and that video. But we're going to get to another video and from CBC. And again, we're going to talk about the border because another one of Trump's huge policies is about our immigration policy and the American immigration policy, and Trump clamping down on all immigration into the United States, quite simply from foreign lands, unless, of course, you are not from. If you are in a first world developed / Western European country, which you have a whole lot of education from, then you could. But he really wants to concentrate on the Mexicos, the Central Americas, the Caribbean, as he would say it, the shithole countries. So again, we have this video here. Is Trump right about the Canadian border? Let's get into that. It's another about that series, and let's get into this right away. Subscribe to CBC and the About That series. Really, really cool information done in a bite-sized form that people can understand. I would subscribe to them immediately. It's a great little forum here, and shout out to the CBC for doing this. Let's continue.
Election issue here in Canada, but since he threatened a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican goods if those two countries didn't help stop the flow of drugs and illegal aliens into the U.S.
The Prime Minister has lost control of everything. He's lost control of the borders, lost control of immigration.
I think the leader of the opposition needs to reflect carefully on whether he really wants to amplify the erroneous narratives that the Americans are putting forward.
So let's figure this out. Is the Canadian border a real threat to the U.S., or is this just political leverage? A few years ago, the number of people arrested trying to sneak across the Canada-U.S. border, so through dirt roads, farm fields, things like that, that number did start to tick up from about 900 in 2021 to more than 2,000 in 2022. But it's in the 2 years since that the number of arrests spiked dramatically. And look at 2024. There were more than 23,000 arrests, 25 times what we saw in 2021. But let's put this into perspective. In that same time frame, along the southern border with Mexico, agents made 1.5 million arrests, people who were trying to sneak through, which is clearly not even comparable. A fact that Trudeau apparently raised to Trump in person during his recent visit to Florida. But here's the counter argument from the incoming Trump administration. 1.5 million arrests at the southern border is actually 500,000 fewer than the number of arrests in 2023 and almost 700,000 fewer than in 2022. And since the US tightened its asylum rules a few months ago, southern border crossings have been dropping even more dramatically. So, they say, yes, the scale of the problem on the Mexican border is larger, but they're starting to get that under control. What's getting out of control is the situation up here in Canada.
Alien smuggling, drug trafficking has always happened on a small scale, but it's increased significantly.
According to the U.S. Border Patrol, the vast majority of these new crossings on the Canadian border are happening in one very specific area, known as the Swanton sector, which has Ontario and Quebec on one side, and on the other, New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire.
Probably one of the biggest hotspots for this type of irregular or illegal crossings from Canada into the U.S., and it's because it's close to highway infrastructure that can take you quickly, down all the way to New York City.
That's our CBC colleague, Jorge Barrera. He's an investigative reporter who's been digging into this spike in Canada-US border crossings. A few months ago, he traveled to this area and spoke to a family whose farm backs out onto the border between Quebec and New York State. This video you're seeing is from the farm's security cameras. It shows just how many people they've witnessed crossing their property to enter the US. And in July, he said he counted 48 people in just 1 week right near his doorstep.
And that's just one camera in one area. So it's hard to say how many actually didn't walk by my camera that catches them.
And consider one other.
So think about it this way, ladies and gentlemen. What is happening is, what is happening is that a lot of people, a lot of illegal immigrants are taking flights to Canada because of their lack of Canadian borders, claiming asylum, and then from there in that region, basically walking across to the United States. And that is something that has irked Trump. That has irked the Americans on the other side of the border. Is that a lot of these because that border isn't really patrolled by Canadian border control or by American customs agents, the inland basically the American authorities there. So it's a hidden type of illegal immigration that has gone unseen until now, until Trump has raised said concerns and again has brought it to the attention of Canadian and the Canadian government. Let's continue.
Thing. That number we raised, the 23,000 irregular crossings, those are just the people who were caught, right? It's impossible to know how many people don't get caught and actually make it through undetected. The incoming Trump administration and many of the people we spoke to believe 23,000 is an undercount. The problem is likely much bigger, in part because of just how few officers are patrolling on the Canadian side up north compared to the Mexican side down south.
You got a lot fewer resources up here in Border Patrol agents, so they're overwhelmed. And they're not catching a lot of them because there's only so much the few resources up here can do.
They say that, yeah, it's the tip of the iceberg. They miss people. And when I'm going through court records, when, say, someone is caught picking someone up, sometimes they admit in the court records to having done runs like this, 3, 4, 5 times. So maybe it's a lot busier than we realized.
Okay, so what about Trump's claim about illicit drugs pouring into the US from Canada? Well, in 2024, 43 pounds of fentanyl, 72 pounds of heroin, and 185 pounds of meth were seized at the Canadian border. Maybe that sounds like a lot, and it kind of is, but just look at what came across the Mexican border into the US that year. As with the border crossing numbers, there's just no comparison. But here's the argument. Again, these numbers only represent the drugs that were caught, not the drugs that managed to sneak through. And Canada's numbers may be dramatically higher because it's been unable to control illicit drugs coming into the country. According to the mayor of Delta, BC, only 1% of containers coming into their international seaports are actually checked by the Canada Border Services Agency. And he says organized crime groups have been exploiting this for years.
We've had a reduction of policing services since 1997, where they disbanded the port police and didn't replace it with anything that was totally effective.
In terms of, knowing how much is coming in, people, illegal goods such as illegal firearms, opioids that come into the country, we're largely in the dark. The CBSA is at a level of staffing where there's whole modes that we're not really doing anymore. We don't look at rail at all. We don't know what comes into the country through rail. Airports, we've almost fully automated, so we're speaking to almost no one coming through an airport anymore.
So there is data to back up Trump's concerns about a surge of people and drugs crossing the Canada-US border. But the scale of the problem in Canada versus Mexico, two countries which Trump has lumped together in his tariff threat, it's pretty far off.
The increase is quite...
So again, just to reiterate the point, Trump has a point. Trump has a very good point with regards to the illegal importation of contraband, of illegal substances, of drugs, of fentanyl. It's a huge problem because Canada has not dedicated much, if any, resources to stopping border crossings of said drugs into the United States, into Canada. And listen, organized crime is having a field day. Today, I think Toronto sees one of its biggest drug trafficking hauls in its history. I think it was about $600 million worth of drugs. But that is a drop in the well compared to the other drugs that seep through the border undetected through many ports and many means, because there isn't a dedicated force of law enforcement agents who are there to stop said drugs from coming over the border. So again, organized crime makes a killing in the drug game here in Canada. Not so much in the United States, but definitely here in Canada. Let's continue.
Significant. But yeah, if you compare that to those coming in from Mexico, it's a drop in the bucket.
But what if the problem wasn't just about raw numbers? Trump's team points out different types of people tend to come from Canada than Mexico, and that's a threat to their national security.
There has been understanding from Canada that they can't be a gateway to terrorists coming into the United States. Canada has the most lax immigration policies, I think, in the world. I mean, that's why so many special interest aliens cross through the Canadian border.
Okay, so the allegation here from the man Trump has appointed to oversee national borders is that it's not just asylum seekers or even drug dealers crossing into the United States from Canada. It's also these special interest aliens, which he defines as people with possible links to terrorist groups. And the administration gives two reasons why. Let's start with the immigration policies that he mentioned.
In terms of the criticism that the incoming Trump administration might have about screening, I mean, there is a point there, because we don't really screen people fully for security unless they're applying for permanent residence.
If you're applying for a temporary visa into the United States from most countries around the world, it's going to be kind of intense. Officials generally cross-reference a wider range of intelligence databases and terrorist watch lists than Canada does. They might also call you in for a physical interview at a U.S. consulate.
Every person crossing the U.S. border must provide their photograph and their fingerprints. They know the biometrics of every non-citizen living or entering their country. They also tie biometrics to their travel documents and to their identity documents.
Canada is comparatively easy to visit, and over the past few years, it became even easier. The Canadian government loosened further some of its entry requirements, and the rest of the world started to take notice.
For example, in India, there are basically travel packages that you can arrange to get you to Canada and to the US, where you pay a certain amount, you're guided through or helped with the visitor's visa process, and then you get a ticket to Toronto, Montreal, Calgary, what have you, and then someone's going to meet you once you get to the airport, drive you to a location, then you make for the border.
And remember the owner of that farm that we talked about earlier? The RCMP believes human smuggling groups are using his property too.
And you can see that in those videos, there seems to be a guide, and he shows up in a couple of videos, guiding people with a cell phone, likely, GPS or Google Map, just a location that he could also share to, a driver who's going to pick them up.
Now, it is undoubtedly true that most people who cross illegally into the U.S. from Canada are not national security threats. They make exceptional sacrifices and risk much to escape hardship, to build a better life, to find a fresh start. But the concern from the incoming Trump administration is that some number of those people are dangerous.
And obviously anybody.
So again, it's undeniable, really, that Donald Trump is completely correct in the sense of Canada's very, very lax in terms of our border, very, very lax in terms of our immigration laws, very, very lax in terms of our, political asylum and visitors visa and all the, and other entries into Canada through legal means. And the world is taking notice of this and realizes that Canada is one of the places to go in terms of getting into the first world. I think a lot of Western Europe, and America, they're very, very much higher level in terms of, stopping any sort of, would-be terrorist cell individuals or any sort of, drug trafficking, child trafficking, human trafficking, sex and businesses that may be allowed to cross our border quite easily, in fact, because we don't dedicate that amount of money to stopping said crimes. And the world is taking notice, and Canada is one of the key points of entry for these types of organized crime. And Trump is alerting the Canadian government that, hey, you're dropping the ball in terms of allowing these, in terms of stopping people at your border, because not only do they go stop and stay in Canada, but they also travel to the U.S. And it's a very easy way of slipping into the U.S. And Trump is alerting Canadians, the Canadian government, that you need to step your game up in terms of your security when it comes to terrorist / criminal entities and all type forms of trafficking that can devastate a nation, devastate a family, and and criminalize a nation as a result. So Canada needs to do a better job. Simply put, they need to dedicate more money to border services, to border security, and to stopping said traffickers and crimes at the border where they see it. Because again, ours is an open book, way more so than the United States. Let's continue.
That's crossing the border irregularly like that is probably somebody that should be checked. Some of them want to be brought into the immigration system. They'll claim asylum status, but some of them don't want to be found either. They don't want it to be known that they're crossing the border.
We have the example of a Pakistani man living in Toronto. He was arrested near the border in Quebec on allegations he's plotting an Islamic State inspired mass shooting at a Jewish center in New York.
He allegedly traveled from Toronto through Montreal on Wednesday, using 3 different cars, intending to cross the U.S. border with the help of a smuggler who was to be paid in cash.
So he came on a student visa. Where was the vetting for that? And I think this is where it gets back to, we don't typically vet fully until the person's applying for permanent residence.
Over the past 2 years,
it's a really good point raised by Council Jane, in that Canada doesn't really check on people's identification and reasons for being in Canada unless they want to seek asylum. Other than that, they're just traveling, and student visas are readily available in Canada, and people can travel wherever they want within those student visas. And with that, terrorist cells can be indeed instituted within Canada, spreading to the United States, and that's something that with a simple student visa, and that's something that Americans want to be cracking down on, and that Canadians need to start cracking down on, because it is a problem that's only getting worse, and people see terrorist cells see Canada as an easy way to institute terrorist acts, not only in Canada but in the United States as well. Let's continue.
More than 1,100 people on U.S. terror watch lists were arrested while trying to cross from Canada into the U.S. That is more than double the number arrested on the southern border with Mexico.
The Trump, folks are sort of looking at this going, that's a lot of people in Canada that that aren't screened fully. And what if they make a run for it? So there's those kinds of security concerns, which are frankly legitimate.
Now, the Canadian government did recently reinstate some of those visa requirements that we mentioned. But the issue of immigration and security screenings is still top of mind for the Trump administration. Then there's patrolling the border itself. Another big issue the Trump administration says it has with the Canadian border is just how easy it is to get across because of how few officers are patrolling it.
Less fewer officers up here in Thousand Islands. You can cross St. Lawrence River in 45 seconds.
Trump has indicated the U.S. is planning to beef up its patrols in certain problem areas, and it signaled it wants Canada to do the same. But there's a pretty key difference between how Canadian and how American border agents can operate. And here's what I mean. If you're walking down the street in a city like New York, a police officer cannot just stop you, question you, search your stuff without some sort of reasonable cause. But according to a decades-old Supreme Court ruling, searches made at the border are reasonable simply by virtue of the fact that they occur at the border. And you know what they consider close enough to the border to do that? Within 100 miles. So if you're within 100 miles, 160 kilometers of the border, they generally can search your car, luggage, wallets, pockets, even your cell phone without a warrant. In Canada, border agents do have similar widespread powers to question you, to search your stuff, even ask for your laptop password. But these officers are only responsible for official ports of entry. So airports, seaports, land crossings. Every other part of the border is the responsibility of the RCMP, and they have much narrower powers.
For any police force, we're not just a stop and check country where you can just go up and start street checking people for no reason. You have to have a valid reason. You have to have more than just a gut feeling or a mere suspicion.
And according to some RCMP officers, that reality makes it pretty hard to catch anybody, including human smugglers, in the act.
We went
Sorry about that.
on a ride along, and it's a frustrating patrol because these officers, they want to stop illegal activity, and it's just not very easy.
You spend so many hours on the road, you want to do things, you want to prevent things from happening.
Now, Canadian border agents could be given more power, the ability to patrol the entire border and react in real time to anything they see as suspicious.
It's been a sore spot for us for a long time. Something we've been bringing up is to allow us to actually fulfill our legal mandate and work between those ports of entry.
If a CBSA officer sees a group of people crossing the border 100 meters outside of their fenced area, they are supposed to call the RCMP, who then gets dispatched and they come down, and it's just absolutely ridiculous. Of course, those officers should be patrolling the border.
And this week, Canada's...
So again, it's about time that greater powers were given to the RCMP at border crossings and around border crossings for search and seizure, because it's allowing for a lot of illegal, for a lot of crime and a lot of terrorist cells to operate in and around the area because they don't have probable cause for search and seizure. So again, it's a very problematic event in which that this person may be suspect of certain illegal acts and certain illegal endeavors, but you can't arrest them because you don't have enough evidence to do so, and that's a problem that Canada has definitely had to tighten up on and really stiffen, because terrorist cells realize that all you need is a student visa, a hop, skip, and a jump away, and you're in the United States or in Canada, willing to do your terrorist best, and that can't be allowed in the modern world anymore, quite simply. So we need to more money from the government needs to indeed be poured into said services protecting our borders and allowing the RCMP to have special powers to protect said borders. We'll be back for a second hour here on Talk Live. we're going to get into a novel idea in terms of free trade between the United States and Canada. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for joining me here in the first hour. I'll be back right soon here on Talk Talk Live on IG. Stay tuned. Yes, we are back live here on Talk Talk Live on IG and YouTube. We're just continuing and finishing up on some of the recommendations for the Canadian government to tighten up our borders in terms of illegal activities such as border crossings, such as criminal acts, and terrorist cells. So let's continue with the video from the CBC. And is Trump right about the Canadian border? And I from the About That series, and I believe he may just be. Let's continue.
Public safety minister said this is something his government is considering, but it might take some time. Their more immediate priority, he says, is giving the RCMP more resources.
We have, in recent days, worked with the RCMP and Border Services about continuing to support them in terms of acquiring new technologies, drones, helicopters.
So look, everyone we spoke to seemed to agree on a few key things. Yes, there is a problem on the northern border. No, it's not as severe as the southern border, but yes, it's trending in the wrong direction, and there are legitimate security issues to hammer out. And so, Trump's threat of a trade war has turned into a top priority for the Canadian government.
Excellent points there made by About That series from CBC. Subscribe to CBC. Excellent series there in terms of not only the terror situation and the trade deficit between Canada and the United States, but also problems at the Canadian border and how the world, criminal elements of the world and terrorist elements of the world are starting to see Canada as a safe haven for their for nefarious acts. So let's continue on with what indeed Trudeau has said about the trade deficit. In this full, I'll just keep it to the statement made by Trudeau. I'm not going to get into question time too much here. Trudeau promises dollar for dollar responses if Trump tariffs Canada full. Now the problem here is, this is coming from Global News. Shout out to Global News here in Canada. The problem here is that Trudeau is a lame duck prime minister. Now, he may have certain powers at this time, but they won't be in existence for long. He'll have to give up those powers to another prime minister within his party, but I would think they'd have to give up those powers to another party, period. So they may have a whole other platform. But we're going to give Trudeau his statement as to what he will do if indeed Trump starts hammering tariffs on any goods and services that come out of Canada. And it's his press conference that he just did, I think yesterday, I believe. Yes, indeed. Yes, it is. I think it is yesterday. It actually is from today. It's today's press conference. So let's hear from the soon-to-be ex-prime minister.
Was officially inaugurated yesterday as President of the United States. My cabinet and I have gathered here with a singular focus: upholding our long-standing friendship with the United States and protecting Canada against potential tariffs. As I've stated on numerous occasions, the Canada-U.S. trade relationship is one of the most successful in the world. We heard the President's comments yesterday and the directive he has issued to examine the trade relationship between Canada and the United States while exploring the possibility of tariffs. But we remain confident in the facts. Canadian energy powers American manufacturing, businesses, and homes.
There it is. So when he's referring to Canadian energy powers the American economy, he's absolutely correct in that. He is right in that. If it's not for Canadian oil, Canadian oil and gas, Canadian lumber, Canadian timber, and such, then the American economy would indeed not be as efficient as it is to this point in time, and he would, and there would be certain definite issues with regards to a smooth running American economy. Let's continue.
Of America's top 5 trading partners, Canada is the only one with whom the United States runs a trade surplus in manufacturing. And Canada buys more goods made by Americans than China, Japan, and Germany combined.
That is part of our special relationship between ourselves and the United States. We do share a common culture, as it were. There are certain certain colloquialisms and cultural differences between us to a certain extent, but for the most part, we're pretty much the same, if not from different dialects. We pretty much share the same views and share the same ideas on many a thing, and again, we share in terms of entertainment, goods, services, especially services. We are indeed a huge consumer of American services and businesses, to be fair. Let's continue.
On top of that, President Trump said that he wants to usher in a golden age for the United States. That will require more steel and aluminum, more critical minerals, more reliable and affordable energy, more of everything to run the U.S. economy full steam ahead. Canada has all those resources, and we stand at the ready to work with the United States to create a booming and secure North American economy.
In other words, listen, business as usual. We're willing to work with you. You can't just throw it away like silly putty. But again, a lot of this is Trump is rhetoric, and it would take a whole sea change of American extraction and an American GDP in order to obtain these goods and services, especially these goods that they do from Canada so cheaply. So again, I think that's indeed saber rattling on Trump's part, and he's just butthurt that the American economy runs so well because of Canada, and he sees it as a subsidy, but no. The fact of the matter is he's buying our services. He's buying our goods and services because they're cheaper and they're more readily available, and Canada's at the ready once again to supply the American economy with what it needs. Let's continue.
The alternative for them would be more resources from Russia, China, or Venezuela. Canada is a safe, secure, and reliable partner in an uncertain world.
And the fact of the matter is, he's absolutely right. It's pretty much an undefended border. Goods and services flow through freely, and he'll pay a lot more in terms of monies to import said services from around the world, because it's going to take a lot longer for those goods and services to get there. So what Trudeau is saying here is indeed that Canada is an indispensable trading partner of the United States, and Trump needs to realize that, or else he'll have to pay a price, and a huge price for that, to get the goods and services that he's looking for at a cheaper price. And that will come from around the world, so, like it or lump it, Donald Trump. Let's continue.
President Trump also repeated his concerns about the border. While less than 1% of fentanyl and illegal immigrants that enter the United States come from Canada, our government has already acted to address the concerns raised by the president about border security with an over $1 billion comprehensive border plan. We're already working collaboratively to keep our citizens safe on both sides of the border.
So again, that's something that Trump indeed needed to work on. There's no doubt about that. That this is it's a problem. It's not a bigger problem as he has with Mexico, but it's still a problem that is ever growing. as was stated in the CBC video. But as Trump said, he's dedicating $1 billion to beef up security along the border. But again, he needs to widen powers with the RCMP in order to allow for greater amounts of search and seizure, greater powers of search and seizure against any sort of illegal activities happening not only on the border but around the border, as the United States have most of their inland, as they have the HMS, the Homeland Security. Homeland Security is allowed to have special powers 100 miles away from the border. So again, they can search and seize who they want from a good distance, where Canada does not do that, and they need to change that. And so, yeah, I think it's good for Trudeau to recognize that and do more about it. But again, I would like to see, as was stated in the CBC program, more powers for the RCMP to search and seize, especially illegal activity, and terrorist and criminal acts, and illegal immigration. Let's continue.
Of course, if the president does choose to proceed with tariffs on Canada, Canada will respond. And everything is on the table. Working in unison with Team Canada, as Team Canada, with business leaders, organized labor, civil society, Indigenous leaders, and premiers from coast to coast to coast, we are prepared for every possible scenario.
The Canadian, Mr. Trudeau can talk tough because he's running a budget not a budget surplus, but he's running a surplus, a trade surplus with the United States. So he can talk tough. He realizes that he's in the ascendancy. The Americans need his economy in order to thrive, in order to grow, in order to run. So a like-for-like tariff service would much more. A like-for-like tariff response would much more hurt the United States economy at this time than the Canadian economy, and again, that's the reason why Trump has added in recent times that Canada should become America's 51st state, because they know for a fact that such tariffs will eventually hurt them in the end. So he needs to make a relax with that. To be fair, he can talk tough for a while, but when it comes down to it, you can only talk tough for so long, and he realizes that he really does need the Canadian economy in order to survive. Well, I wouldn't say survive, but definitely thrive. But so again, he needs to calm down with the rhetoric and play ball with Canada. Let's continue.
In fact, just last night, I spoke to Premier Ford in his capacity as chair of the Council of the Federation, and he reiterated his unwavering commitment on behalf of Canadian premiers to working all together. This is an important and challenging moment for Canada and for Canadians. And we know there will be many such moments. Through all of it, I want to be clear that we have Canadians' backs. We will protect our national interest while we protect the most successful economic and security relationship the world has ever seen. I and my cabinet will continue to work with leaders across the country who've stepped up to unite in defense of Canadian workers, Canadian businesses, Canadian sovereignty. And that is precisely what we will continue to focus on today during this cabinet retreat. Thank you. Merci d'être ici. With that, I'm looking forward to your questions.
I will take. Okay, so we're going to leave it there. So at the end of the day, the Canadian, Prime Minister Trudeau, and I'm sure any incoming Prime Minister will be of the same voice in that, they're willing to work with the United States, but, don't take kindness for weakness, because the Canadian government realizes that it's running a budget surplus. The American government needs the Canadian infrastructure, Canadian goods and services in order to survive, and they're not willing to compromise on it. And if they want to throw tariffs at us, we can throw tariffs at them. And in a blind town, one-eyed man is king, as my mother would always say, and nobody wins in such a tariff war. So negotiations have to be had, and but the fact of the matter is the Americans still do need Canadian services. They're willing to do it themselves. As the Canadian Broadcasting Company video stated, the first video stated, it's going to need a sea change of development in the United States for them to supply their own goods and services to the point where they don't need Canada. And that's going to take years and years and years of infrastructural change in order to do that. That's not happening during Trump's lifetime. And by the time he's out of office, quite simply, all plans may change. So we'll leave it at that. So, but again, thank you very much to Global News for that. I'm not going to go into any sort of the question time. But it's clear that Prime Minister Trudeau wants to work with Donald Trump in order to, for as long as he survives, because Lord knows it's not going to be long. But he wants to work with the American president in order to find a way through this tariff activity, because it doesn't serve anybody's purpose. But one thing I want to get to here is what Kevin O'Leary brought up. Here in this another CBC News CBC News online forum, that is Front Burner. Kevin Leary, one of the stars of Shark Tank, one of the former stars of Dragon's Den. He developed Dragon's Den to a point where he sold to the States and made a fortune in terms of creating the show Shark Tank, with whom he has I forget his friend there on Shark Tank. Hold on, let me just look that up. Shark Tank hosts. Yes, indeed. So the cast, the Shark Tank cast. Let me see here. There we go. Yes, Robert Herjavec. There you go. Robert Herjavec, another Canadian. He helped develop the show down there, and it's a huge hit in the United States. It's been running for into season 15, and it's a fantastic show. I watch from time to time. Indeed, there's the cast of Shark Tank. If you did not know, we'll just bring it up here in a second. But yeah, Robert O'Leary and Robert Herjavec, two Canadian boys who brought that idea to the United States, and it has worked to. It's worked to great effect, quite simply, and it's been a very, very successful show. Let me just see if I can get this a little bigger here. Oh, I guess not. But anyways, let me see image sizes. Let's see here. There we go. That's a bit bigger. There we go. So that's the Shark Tank cast. These are the two original Canadians, Robert Herjavec and Robert O'Leary, who brought the idea down to the States. And I think this is another Canadian here. I'm not too sure, but again, it's a Canadian idea that is done bang up business in the United States, and is running into its 15th season. So shout out to them for such a successful venture. But what Kevin O'Leary has to say about, let me just see if there's any comments. I haven't really checked out if there's any comments on YouTube. We're good to go here. So again, one thing that Kevin O'Leary suggests is, we're going to go back to the browser. We're going to go back here. Thank you very much. One thing that Kevin O'Leary suggests is indeed a sort of a free trade on steroids. I'll let him explain in this video here. Kevin O'Leary in the 51st state and his idea about Canada moving forward and in conjunction with the United States. And let's get into it now with Kevin O'Leary. And I thought it was quite fascinating what he would like to do going forward in terms of his relationship with the United States, of which he has many businesses, he has many ventures, he's a very successful guy on both of the border, but a proud Canadian, as he has stated. He's always never renounced his Canadianhood. And again, he does a lot of business, and he spends a lot of time in the United States. So let's hear what he has to say about his proposal for free trade on steroids, in my estimation. Let's go.
wouldn't end with us just becoming the 51st state. So I wonder if we could start here. What do you want to see happen, and how is it different from what we currently have with the United States?
Okay, so this narrative started about 3 weeks ago from a trip to Mar-a-Lago I had. And it was a violent reaction, obviously. No Canadian wants to sell their sovereignty, neither do I. But as I've told people many times, particularly now that we approach Donald Trump's inauguration, in dealing with Trump, you have to be able to differentiate the noise from the signal. The signal is there's a huge opportunity, an economic opportunity, to create a behemoth economy that provides for all of its citizens and gives us incredible financial and military might in a very uncertain world. So we can get into the details of this.
Yeah, I mean, take me through the details. Like, what is the signal to you? What do you think it looks like? Because certainly what he's saying out loud is that he will use economic force to get rid of the border between the two countries.
So I'm in Washington today. So is Danielle Smith. She is making the rounds because she has an advantage now that no other premier has. She has a personal relationship with Donald Trump and many of his advisors and his administration. She did the right thing. She took a lot of criticism for it, I understand, but she's thinking long term. And she also knows that she's vitally important to the United States. 60% of their energy is provided. Over 4 million barrels a day go into the U.S., and she wants to double that. That's her objective. Trump wants it too. He wants the pipeline. I'm getting specific now. And, Burgum, the energy czar, wants it also. And all of this stuff is happening in the context of a very volatile period as Trump takes power. And he has threatened to use tariffs. I got it. So
before he explains it, realize what he said there. He wants, Trump has already said he wants to drill, baby, drill, as already stated, but he wants to drill in Canada. He really wants to drill down here more and more. He wants more he wants more Canadian energy, but especially oil production, but at a price that doesn't, take his eyes out, quite simply. So he really wants to, because he realizes if he takes more money from us, the trade surplus to Canada is that much greater. But he realizes that without Canadian oil, his American, America doesn't run as well, quite simply. So he wants to, he wants the pipeline in Alberta. He wants to obtain more oil from instead of and fossil fuels from Canada instead of more renewable resources, as we've already stated that. But America can't produce that sort of product without Canadian input. It just can't. So that's the underlying part. That's the fine print that you don't see, is that when he's asking to drill, baby, drill, he's basically asking Canada to drill, baby, drill for the most part. Yeah, Americans can do it, but they don't have the sort of, crude oil that is of higher grade that Canada does. So, if he's asking anybody to drill, it's Canada. So let's continue.
The idea, which is informal, first of all, I do not represent the Canadian government. Far from it. I'm trying to get rid of the current Canadian government, and so is the rest of Canada, as far as I can tell. I am a single individual having a conversation with another single individual who happens to be becoming the President of the United States. So what? I'm allowed to say whatever I wish in a conversation, and I take that freedom, and I do it. But these are ideas that have been floated around in private conversations around Mar-a-Lago. It's just some guy's house, and he's having a dinner party. That's exactly the way I would categorize this. It's not on the record. He's not president having these conversations.
He's going to be the president tomorrow. So just what are the ideas? Take me through what it would look like, if you don't mind.
Number one, a common currency. So all of our commodities, all of our resources are priced in U.S. dollars all around the world. We are one of the richest nations on earth in terms of proven reserves. It's all priced in U.S. dollars. I'm going to suggest to you that if you polled Canadians right now, 11 out of 10 would want to swap their Trudeau pesos for the American dollar. There's no question about that. So that's not a hard sell. Now, if you're going to do that, you have to get a couple of seats on the board of the Fed. So the Bank of Canada would cooperate with the Fed on a basically, if you want to keep your Trudeau pesos, that's fine. But you have a common currency now in the U.S. dollar. You know, people are they're going to hang them up on put them on their bedroom wall, say, remember that worthless piece of paper? Now I have something real. So look.
So what O'Leary's proposing here is, I've seen it myself in across the pond. It's basically Canada's version of the euro, North America's version of the euro, and a common courtesy with a group of countries, you know, as signatories. So what Kevin O'Leary is proposing here is, you know, Canada's version of the euro, be it the Canadian dollar or the North American dollar, that can be exchanged for goods and services on both sides of the border at par rate. So again, you can still have your, but that would phase out, I think, for all intents and purposes, the Canadian dollar and the U.S. dollar. It would just be the North American dollar, and which can be used throughout both Canada and the U.S. I don't know if Mexico would want to be a signatory. I would very much think that they would, but under a Trump administration, they would probably be cut out. So it'd be a North American dollar, and again, it would get rid of the, as David O'Leary so eloquently said, Kevin O'Leary so eloquently said, it would get rid of the Canadian peso. So the underrated Canadian dollar, which is about $69 cents worth the American dollar. So again, I think it would give us more buying power, and not only here but around the world, which is, you know, I think a novel idea, quite simply. Let's continue.
Let's start there. Okay.
So let me ask you, Mr. O'Leary, what would happen to the money in my TFSA or RRSP if we did that? So right now the dollar's clocking in at 69.5 cents, right? Would I suddenly be 30% poorer?
No, it's to be negotiated. I would argue that Canadians should ask for a one-to-one parity, one-time swap.
And why would the U.S. won't ever give us that?
How do you know? It hasn't been negotiated yet. We don't know. That's the whole point.
But like, what would be in it for them? What would be in it for them?
The unity with a country that would provide a massive economy with not having need of anything from anybody else. We'd have total independence on every single resource and precious metal.
Right now, when they buy stuff from us, it's cheaper for them. Why would they want to make it more expensive?
Why would they make it more expensive? It's the same. It's a common currency. We price our oil in U.S. dollars already. We already do that. We price our wood in U.S. dollars. We price our precious metals in U.S. dollars, not just to the Americans, everybody on Earth. I don't think the dollar's a tough one. It's just not a tough sell. If somebody came along and said, if you join this program, you get U.S. dollars in your savings account, I don't think you're going to say no. I don't think any Canadian is going to say no. That's not the problem. The problem is getting into more detail of what the union looks like. So if you had 2 seats on the Fed, which is a good prorated amount, you'd have some say on interest rates. And the Bank of Canada would continue to exist. And so would the Canadian banking system. It all stays the same, except we're trying to solve for an economic union. Next. No tariffs anywhere, not just north-south. Because I'll tell you, take Vermont, for example. They're pretty unhappy about the situation with dairy in Quebec. We have barriers between provinces right now that are worse than tariffs being proposed by Trump on Canadian goods going in the United States. You cannot ship wine from British Columbia to Quebec or Ontario without massive tariffs and sometimes bans.
Between the U.S. and Canada,
Before we go into the tariffs thing, let's just discuss the North American dollar just one more time. I think it may be disadvantageous for Americans to include Canadians in a North American dollar because, again, their goods and services will be more expensive. For Canadians, absolutely. I think it will allow for us to buy more goods and services from the United States. It'll allow for, again, parity with a stronger economy. It's all advantageous for the United States, but not all advantageous for Canada, but not so much for the United States because, again, the reason why they trade with us so much is because our Canadian dollar is more advantageous for a U.S. economy. So therefore, it really will take away the buying power and the economies of scale that the Americans enjoyed for a while through our currency. So it's an idea which favors Canadians, the North American dollar, and a shared currency as it has in Europe through the euro. But again, I think it's more advantageous for Canadians than Americans. So it will be a tough sell for Americans to sign on to that because they gain such an advantage by our cheap goods and services. Let's continue.
Few tariffs with the exception
Why
of
don't you
jewelry,
ask?
as you mentioned,
Why don't you
lumber,
ask a
poultry,
maple?
aren't you just describing to me
That's not true. What you
USMCA?
just said there is not factual, okay? The price of maple syrup, a multi-billion-dollar commodity, is priced by a cooperative in Quebec. And the farmers who tap maple syrup in Vermont are pissed. They have no say in the price of what they spend their time creating. It's an unfair situation.
What about our industries, though? Like, I guess like maple syrup, but certainly like BC wines or our media landscape. How do they not become completely awash in American companies? What about our culture?
We don't have to give up our culture. You're not giving up your citizenship. If you're born in Montreal like I was, you're not giving up that. We're only focusing on the economic opportunity. If you're manufacturing something in Quebec or in Ontario or BC, you have open access to the largest market on earth with no tariffs. Complete access to the largest market.
And you don't think they take over ours? Like, what happens to BC?
They can take over it now. You can buy a Canadian company. You can come in and buy, and we can buy. I buy American companies. That's what I'm doing here. I invest in American companies. We're talking about stripping away the resistance of tariffs. I mean, these are common sense situations. Everybody, I get the paranoia of, the rhetoric and the noise we talked about earlier. Oh my goodness, I'm going to be an American. No, you're not. You're not going to be an American. You're just going to get access to the largest market on earth. Now, let's talk about that access for you personally. If you're Indigenous today in Canada, lucky enough to be an Indigenous citizen, you walk across the border free, both ways. That is a privilege the Indigenous people of all North America have, no matter what state or province they're in. I'm proposing something similar called a uni. Now, let me explain how this works. It takes some of the ideas from the Economic Union in Europe, but adds to it. If you're a Canadian citizen in good standing with a Canadian passport, or the same in the United States, you have in good standing a U.S. passport, you can apply for a uni. Both countries have a veto right. So, if you get approved in both countries, you get this new passport that gives you freedom of movement anywhere you wish in North America, including your family. You can live wherever you like. You pay a one constant tax rate. Let's just call it 21%, no deductions. But where the uni comes in, even more importantly, is controlling immigration. If you want to come to Waterloo, for example, and apply to be a robotics engineer, the most coveted degree you can get in engineering right now, we let people come and do that from all around the world. We've spent millions building the infrastructure there in the co-op programs. And then, like idiots, we kick them out after they graduate. How stupid is that? Why don't we grant them a uni and pre-approve their families with background checks and then let them into the country and say you can work anywhere you want?
Well, why wouldn't that result in people just going to the United States and working there? How would that not result in healthcare workers just going to Buffalo or Phoenix and setting up shop there? I'm just trying to figure out how this does not cause the worst brain drain that we've ever seen.
Just to stop, Mr. O'Leary there. That idea of the uni, free access to anywhere in the United States or in Canada, you can live wherever you want on the North American continent. That has a little that can be sold. That you can sell that to an American. Let's say an American wants to live in Canada or live in the Canadian wilderness. They can do that. If an American wants, if a Canadian wants to live in Atlanta, let's say, they can do that, no problem. No need to get a green card. No need to get any sort of go through any sort of citizenship. If you're in good standing in one country and you apply for the union, you pass, and you can live anywhere in that state for a certain tax rate, which is, I think, a good sell now to people on both sides of the border, but also the fact of the tariff idea is something that the Americans would buy into because, again, they would get our goods and services at a good rate, but again, they don't have to. There is no trade surplus or trade deficit they have to deal with. Basically, our resources are their resources. We keep our we have there's a optimal trade initiative, trading agreement between both of our countries, which will allow Americans to get for the Americans to pay at a higher rate in terms of the North American dollar. However, it's considered there's less red tape in order to get said services because we share an economy, which is something that you can sell the Americans, and you can also sell to a lot of Americans the fact that you can live in Canada and take advantage of our universal health care system as a result, which a lot of Americans would love to see. They would love to live in Canada and pay into a universal health care system. You would see an influx, and I mean a huge influx, of Americans into Canada in order to take advantage of such things, and maybe even to a point where maybe it will be explained later that said universal health care may be instituted in the States, quite simply. So it's an idea that has legs. It has legs, but it has to be fleshed out a little more. But I'll let Mr. O'Leary continue.
Basically telling me the Canadians don't want to be Canadians and they all want to move to the United States. That doesn't sound, that sounds ridiculous. That's not going to happen. You know how many Americans want to move up to BC or Kelowna or come in? And American families, many of them, have their roots in Canada or have an Uncle Millie or whatever it is. There's a lot of connectivity and DNA between our two countries.
Well, housing is very expensive here. Salaries are larger in the U.S.
All of that money invested in Canada to reduce housing, and housing is up 4x in the last 8 years. So that's not working, whatever it is. But let's stay on your premise that everybody leaves Canada. That's not going to happen. I think many people would come to Canada. You get an adjustment if you got a uni. First, you have to get it. You have to apply for it and you have to get it. Once you get it, you're free to roam.
Why would Trump agree to this? He's talking a lot about unleashing the largest mass deportation program in the country's history. Contrary to the evidence, he says immigrants are stealing American jobs. So why would he be open to the idea of extending passports and jobs to more people from Canada?
Stop that for a second. We have just a comment here from Lana. If you look at the stats by the World Health Organization, the World Bank, we are safer, have better health care, and more. We rank much higher on many rankings. This seems very one world order. Yes, I would agree, but this is already in operation in the European Union. They've been running on this for the last few years to the point where Britain are absolutely... They can't live down the fact that they left the European Union. They want back in. They just can't admit it, but they want back in because, quite simply, it was to be in the Europe. It was much easier economically for Britain to be in the European Union than without, because it is an island. So they have to import a lot of their goods and services from Europe or other places, and to have such an economy that allows you to import a lot of goods and services at a cheaper rate, and allows you to travel within Europe at a cheaper rate. England are totally regretting that. So again, it does seem very one world order. Lana, thank you very much for your comment. But the fact of the matter is, it's already in existence now in Europe. What Kevin O'Leary is proposing is a European Union type economy in Canada and the United States. And so, and a lot of, and listen, a lot of economies are doing that these days. I think Africa and China are getting together to have some sort of shared economy. I think Russia are involved in that as well. And more of these sort of economies, I think Asia is starting to come together for a shared economy as well. So this is a sign of the times, really. It really is a sign of the times. And I think people in Canada, the United States, would love to have some sort of shared sort of citizenship that that'll allow them to qualify for. And this is an upgrade from having a green card or trying to jump through hoops in order to gain citizenship in Canada. A uni eliminates that. It eradicates that and allows for a simpler movement of citizens from Canada to the United States and the United States to Canada if you qualify. There is a qualification period, and I think and he's well within his rights of doing so. But it's a quite novel idea, to be fair. Let's continue. Thank you very much for your comment, Lana. Like, subscribe, comment to Talk Live. Keep it going, people. Thanks very much for your input tonight.
People you're referencing are illegal immigrants. They broke the law to enter the country. Of course, they're going to get deported. That was the premise he made. He'd been given this majority mandate. That was his number one item, saying, look, I'm going to clean this up. The American people, by 7 out of 10, want him to do this, and he's going to start it this week. The message is, don't come into the country illegally. The uni does not let that happen. You have to apply for it. It's a legal immigration tool, and it's used to be selective on who you let into the economy. And you want the best and the brightest, and you want them to stay. We've got to focus on the signal. This is not about selling sovereignty. This is not about you becoming an American citizen. It's giving you free, unfettered access to the market on an untariffed basis, east-west, north-south. Look, when I started having this conversation, it was very contentious. That was 4 weeks ago. Now 43% of Canadians polled want to learn more. In a couple of weeks...
Well, I'm looking at an Abacus data poll that found 71% completely against it.
Yeah, because that poll said you're giving up your sovereignty. We're not giving up sovereignty under this model. It's just economic union. You know, you have to peel the onion to discover the opportunities. Canadians do not have to agree to this. We're going into this negotiation anyways in about 8 months. I don't know which leader will lead us there, but it won't be Trudeau. And so the point is, this is NAFTA 3 on steroids. That's what this is. Now, if someone offered me a uni, I have an O1 visa for the United States, but they offered me a uni, that would be far more convenient. I would take that, no question about it. If you told me that I had no tariffs in investing in Canada and selling goods made there to the United States, I would invest more in Canada. So would the rest of the world.
You've talked about a flat tax.
Great point raised there by Mr. O'Leary, in that a lot of people are starting to warm up to that idea. They really are. And again, I don't. Getting back to your point there, Lana, in your question there, when it came to the European Union, England wasn't. Great Britain wasn't any more great. Wasn't any less Great British when they were part of the European Union. Spain wasn't any less Spanish when they were part of the European Union. Belgium's not any less Belgian when part of the European Union. Italy is not less Italian by part of the European Union. Everybody has their distinct culture, distinct joie de vivre, distinct way of doing things. That doesn't go away. What has changed is the fact that you can freely go in between countries in order to do your business. It's a business deal, not a losing sovereignty and losing identity deal, which again, it's thriving in the European Union, and I am very sure such an idea would thrive in Canada. And again, it would take a certain status of individual for you to be privy to the advantages here in Canada, be it the universal healthcare system, or let me say a wider living base, or a safer living environment, or go to the United States where there are lower tax laws and greater opportunities for business. there are advantages in both, but you're not losing the identity of being a Canadian or an American by being involved in this unification and North American dollar type system. Let's continue. And as he's already said, it's going to start in 8 months, these negotiations. So think about it.
I think you said 21%, right? Like, how would we be able to fund things like single-payer healthcare here in this country with that?
Well, both healthcare platforms are broken in the United States as well. The insurance policies there are punitively expensive. Canada has a fantastic technology in healthcare, but access is a challenge. This is a perennial problem for both. I would think a larger market and no tariffs, we could solve for it. I mean, this is not new information. Being paranoid about change is not the answer. It's explore the opportunity, look at the signal, and move forward in the path of least resistance. And what I'm suggesting is just common sense.
I mean, do you think it's really about being paranoid about change or steeling ourselves and taking this president at his word?
Trump is, whether you like him or you hate him, what he sees, what he wants is a giant economic union, a behemoth economy that can protect itself.
But I'm sure what he wants is an economic union that benefits the United States, right?
Why do you keep saying it's only to the United States? Why wouldn't Canadians benefit? I don't understand why you think that way.
Well, just a lot of the stuff that makes the EU cool. I can't imagine the United States would want a supranational government, new competition laws. I still have lots of questions about the free flow of labor and what that would do to a brain drain here. The dollar, I do not understand why they would want to negotiate and give us any kind of deal beyond or above market value on the dollar. Like, why would they want to do any of this stuff? And the Fed, and sorry, just to talk about the Fed, like, you know, my understanding is the way that these institutions work is that they prioritize kind of the big guys, right? Like a Germany over a Greece. So is there not a high probability that we really are absolutely not a priority when it comes to decision-making in an institution like that?
No, that's not the problem, and you're wrong. The point is, together, I mean, in some ways, that 49th parallel, why is it there? I mean, if you think about it, that's not the border we're trying to protect. We're trying to protect the northern border because right now the Chinese are knocking on our door and so are the Russians. And I think that's what's on Trump's mind, and Canadians should worry about that too. You know, we have the benefit of being protected by the U.S. military, and we have fought beside them in countless wars, as you know. We're joined at the hip in our beliefs of democracy and freedom of speech. So 80–90% of the pillar of union is there. Nobody said you had to give up your sovereignty or change where you were born or anything like that. That's not the issue. It's an economic union. And so all of this you're speculating, it's fair to do so. You can speculate, but you don't know because it hasn't been negotiated. I'm just one guy having a conversation. I'm not representing the Canadian government, but I'm very fortunate to have 10 million followers, and I broadcast to them and they say what they think. And what I'm hearing is different than what you're hearing. A lot of Americans are interested, a lot of Canadians are interested. I don't have to hire a pollster. I have my own. So I talk to them every day. And they tell me that keep going. This is very interesting. Very interesting. Tell me more. That's what I'm hearing.
And that's a very good point raised by Kevin O'Leary. But I will give the host some credit in terms of Americans. Would they want to be overruled by a North American government over an American government? I don't know if Donald Trump would be a huge fan of that. I don't know if the American people would, the American administration would be a huge fan of an overseeing North American government, or North American government, quite simply, and allowing for the free flow of. I think the free flow of services of workers is I don't think is a big a problem, but indeed. The host does raise a huge issue with regards to a brain drain from Canada to the United States, whereby your intellect, your ingenuity, your entrepreneurship is better paid in the United States because there are lower taxes and a much wider customer base in the United States, which is pretty much the same here. But if you have a great idea here, I think it's very permeable there through different platforms that are offered here on the internet as well. But it is such as Shopify, such as Amazon, that sort of thing. But it's the host has a point in that Canada. The problem with this idea is that a lot of Canadian intellect will go to the States seeking to be better paid, and it can foster a brain drain. And number two, will an American government allow for a North American panel or government that will oversee all goods and services and trade between Canada and the United States? I don't know if Trump or any U.S. administration will allow for that. So it's something that has to be delved into further. But again, these are concerns that need to be discussed if any such idea of a North American economy with a North American currency, a North American dollar, can be discussed any further. Let's continue.
The last time that Trump threatened to tear up NAFTA, we renegotiated. And, I think whatever you think about Trudeau and this government is generally believed to have gone quite well for us, right? We saw trade increase 30% in that time, USMCA. So why not just let those guys negotiate right now instead of kind of inserting yourself in this debate?
Listen, there's no government in Canada. There's no guys doing anything right now. We're in limbo, and I'm free to have conversations.
There was a big meeting earlier this week with all of the premiers, cabinet ministers that have been going down to Mar-a-Lago. There are people that have been working on this before Trump even got elected.
I want to be transparent with you. I advise Trump to ignore them because they're going to be gone soon. And you may think that's treason. It's not. It's just
a lot of people think that that's treasonous. And so, how would you?
And I'll tell you why I have
they
the right to do that.
see you kind of meddling in a situation that you have no mandate to meddle in.
I have a Canadian.
The fact of the matter is, Kevin O'Leary's right. Trudeau's pretty much a lame duck president. I mean, a lame duck prime minister. He's leaving within the next year. There'll be a new prime minister taking up shop. And so, yes, indeed, this is a country in limbo. Quite simply, it's a country whose leader is on borrowed time. So you can't really take him seriously in such negotiations because, again, they know he's leaving. He's already stepped down. So the amount of power that he wields over Donald Trump is minuscule at this point, and it is quite problematic for him to insert himself in these sort of negotiations, knowing that he'll be leaving within the year. So the amount of negotiated strength that he has with Donald Trump is fleeting at best, and it's nothing that Donald Trump will be following in the near future anytime soon. So again, it's a guy like Kevin O'Leary can indeed discuss said ideas with Donald Trump. It's up to Donald to take it to a government to see if they would like the idea, but to float the idea in his ear, and if he has Donald Trump's ear, it doesn't hurt anybody. But again, but he's right. He's not overstepping any bounds because the prime minister is going to be out of there in the next couple of months, so he's not overstepping any sort of sovereignty or any sort of remit in any sort of way because it's the prime minister is leaving. Quite simply. Let's continue.
Passport. I'm a Canadian citizen. I do not want Justin Trudeau negotiating for me. He's an idiot. Sorry.
But it's not just Justin Trudeau, right? It's all the premiers, with the exception of Danielle Smith, right? Do you think Doug Ford is an idiot?
No, Doug Ford did not get a session in Mar-a-Lago. He's been throwing barbs at Trump, and I think he should go down there and talk to him. I think he's a great guy. But I'll tell you something. The answer is not to throw tariffs at each other. The answer is to sit down and discuss. And frankly, the government that has been going down there that you just referenced is the same government that has destroyed our economy as measured by the Canadian dollar. I don't want anybody there negotiating on my behalf as a Canadian. I'm not speaking for anybody else except myself. I have every right to go to Mar-a-Lago and say whatever I want. We enjoy freedom of speech, all of us. You can do the same thing if you wish. But I'm telling you, I don't want him negotiating. I'm talking about the Liberal government. I want new government.
I want to ask you.
Excellent point raised there by Mr. O'Leary. He doesn't know this. Yeah, he's out. He's right that we shouldn't be throwing tariff barbs at each other. We should be negotiating deals. And if he knows Donald Trump, if he's a friend of Donald Trump, he's allowed to go down there. And if he's given an audience with Donald Trump, so he should be allowed to speak to him. Will it have any lasting governmental power? Not necessarily, but it at least gives him an idea as to what can be done between both countries, and it may be able to be negotiated by a future government in the near future. But he's totally in the right to do so because, again, he's absolutely right. Justin Trudeau has ruined an economy, and it'll take such a deal, if not another government, to build it back up because he's messed around with it to every great extent. And that's the reason why he's not seeking a further mandate, and he's resigned himself because he realized he's messed around a little too much. So, so for Kevin O'Leary to bring ideas to the Prime Minister, to the President of the United States, that may be better ideas than what the current Canadian government has. So be it. Let it be. Let it happen. Let's continue.
About Premier Danielle Smith. So, you went down there with her and you helped facilitate that meeting. I understand. You mentioned, or you talked about her a little bit earlier, but why do you think it's a good idea what she's doing? So she's being criticized. People are criticizing her for essentially taking her leverage off the table. She is saying that she's not interested in restricting energy exports out of Alberta, and the criticism of that is that she's just putting her chips on the table, right, and giving away any leverage that we might have as a country. And why is she not doing that?
The idea of erasing $188 billion worth of revenue to Alberta seems stupid to me, and certainly to most Canadians. That would be a really dumb thing to do. I mean, you would be forcing the U.S. to find other sources of energy during a period of negotiation, and you destroy the Alberta economy. How dumb is that? That's crazy, and that shouldn't happen. And so if another premier from another province tells her to do that, I'm not surprised she says what she says, because that's a really stupid idea. That's not protecting your own people.
I'm empathetic that she's trying to stand up for Alberta and Albertans. But just, you're a business guy. Like if I'm a developer and I want to buy 11 houses on a block to tear down, don't those houses stand a better chance of getting a better deal if they negotiate together instead of picking them off one by one? Why is this a good strategy? Shouldn't she give the impression at least that it's on the table, this massive lever that she could pull if she needed to? Why is she giving it away?
Because first of all, there hasn't been any tariffs imposed yet, and we don't know the size of them. She's dealing, as all premiers are, in a void. There's no information yet. You've made the assumption that on Tuesday there's 25%. That may happen, they may not happen. You don't negotiate with a lack of information. You got to wait and see. She always has the option to shut off the spigot anytime she wants. And so right now, all these ideas of what we're going to do to the United States, and let's keep throwing barbs at Trump and let's get the rhetoric up. We don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know, I don't know. We might as well just wait and see. We do have envoys. My next stop after this, I'm going to the Canadian Embassy. There's lots of Canadians here in Washington to celebrate this transition of power, and we're here for a reason, because this is our closest neighbor, and we have an economic union with them. We all understand that. And many of the border state governors and senators are also attending to mingle and meet Danielle Smith and other Canadian representatives, because we know at some point this will get negotiated. It'll get done. Again, we got to focus on the signal. But beyond that, what we started having this narrative about was a bigger union, which has been thrown on the table by Trump. He started that. He's the one that said in a recent speech, as you recall, whatever he called it, a beautiful thing or whatever, it's just noise. But the signal is, let's talk economic union. And that's what I'm talking about. And I think a lot of Canadians are interested in it.
We're gonna stop there for a bit, guys. We're gonna end it here on IG. Come on back. We're just gonna finalize a few more minutes, and we're gonna give closing arguments. Come on back. Thank you very much for joining me on Talk Live on IG, YouTube. We're just gonna finish up the final few minutes here, and like, subscribe, comment on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Yes, indeed. And yes, indeed. Yes, we're going to go here. We're going to go live. And we're back on IG for a final few minutes of this fascinating discussion with Kevin O'Leary and a way forward with Donald Trump. And really, and he's pushing forward with this idea that, indeed, all this rhetoric from what Kevin O'Leary is saying is that all this rhetoric from Donald Trump really is a chance for Canadians to come to the table and really try to hash out a North American agreement that will allow for Americans a bigger entry into the Canadian economy with better trade with better trade negotiations and better trade warranties and ideas and laws, and will allow for and a better trade agreement. That's what I'm trying to get to. A better trade agreement which will allow for Canada to access to the American economy and the largesse that lies therein. So I think this is a come to Jesus moment by Donald Trump. It's basically bringing Canadians and Americans to the table so that we can hash out a better deal in these negotiations. But let's finish up the things here, and then we'll have closing statements. Let's continue. Thank you very much for joining me on Talk Live.
You have an AI data center in Alberta that you're trying to get up and running. You're running into some issues with it, opposition from the Cree Nation, who say that they have not been consulted on it. Was your trip to Mar-a-Lago an attempt to curry favor with Premier Danielle Smith? Did you talk about that with the Premier when you were helping her navigate Mar-a-Lago?
Yes, the initiative, the Alberta initiative, started about 6 or maybe it's 8 months ago now. We also developed data centers in places like West Virginia and North Dakota. And I got a call from one of her representatives, and they said, look, we've seen this press about the West Virginia project. Why is it you never come to Canada and talk to us about data centers? I said, well, everybody knows that you can't get a permit, and that's why there's no foreign capital coming to Canada at all, that's controlled in Ottawa. And he said, well, you should take a call from the Premier because she has a message for you. She has her rights back. I said, oh, really? And of course, out of respect, I'm going to take that call, and I did. And well, first of all, the Albertan people are pretty lucky to have her. She is one hell of a salesperson. I mean, she convinced me to fund a team that flies far away as from Abu Dhabi and Dubai and Washington, D.C., to go up to Alberta, get in a helicopter with engineers and tour the entire province looking for data center sites. And Carl Agren, who is considered worldwide the #1 engineer for data centers, he built the very first hypercenter in Abu Dhabi, and he flew up there. He came back when he landed, and the chopper I could hear it on the cell phone. He said, Kevin, buy it all. I have never seen anything like this. This is a unicorn in the world. The opportunity here for the world's largest data center is unique. It has everything we need. It's got the population. It's got the hospitals. It's got the infrastructure, it's got the roads, it's got the water, it's got the land, and they've got the permits. And I said, are you sure? I thought we couldn't get permits. So I went around the world initially saying, look, it's going to cost $70 billion. That's money coming back into Canada. That's tens of thousands of jobs. That's a whole new Polytechnical Institute to support the AI data center. That's all of that coming back. And most sovereign wealth funds didn't believe it. They didn't believe it because Canada's been off their radar screen. So I said, sorry, Daniel Smith, you're going to have to come on a plane with me, and we're going to have to do the tour together. They don't believe you. And she did. We flew to meet some of the largest funds on earth, eye to eye, and she is Canada's, I believe, best representative. That woman knows how to work a room. She knows how to, look, I'm saying I'm giving her praises, and I don't do this unless it's.
Yeah. I mean, what would you say to somebody who's listening to you and saying that you're praising her so much because you want your data center approved?
No, I don't want my data center. She wants my data center. Canadians want my data center. The whole country wants my data center. Everybody in Canada wants me to bring $70 billion back so that our economy can start lighting up again. And we want to be number one as Canadians in AI technology. It's not me, it's the whole country. I'm just the conduit to make it happen. I'm an investor. That's what I do. I haven't found a single Canadian, including this discussion you referenced around the Indigenous people. We're consulting with our neighbors now. We're going to bring thousands of jobs and educate anybody that's interested in becoming an AI engineer because we need them. And we're in that narrative now. We've reached out first. Many of them, in fact, there's another series of meetings on January 28th. We are not doing.
Okay, we're gonna stop it there because he's getting into his AI data centers and how it's impacting the Alberta economy, especially in the oil fields that are there. But yes, let's just bring things to a close here. So what have we learned here tonight here on Talk Live? One thing is for sure. Let me get it back to the full cam here. One thing is for sure is this. Donald Trump doesn't like Canada so much because he's paying us money for goods and services that are essential to the American economy. And we have a trade surplus because of it. Simply, and more often than not, it's because of our oil. Our oil is some of the best in the world, and 60% of that 60% of the oil that fuels the American economy comes from Canada. That's the reason why we are in a trade surplus. But not only that, we are in a time where Trump is not exactly happy with the way we are patrolling our borders, and how the world is starting to find out about our lax immigration / political and worker asylum systems that we have here that have allowed for a lot of people to seep into the country, often unchecked and invalidated, quite simply. And we are at a time where those borders need to be beefed up to stop terrorist and crime organization and simple illegal immigration from starting, and the Trudeau government is starting to do that. But finally, and that's something that Trump has brought to our attention. That is true. We need to beef that up, and even Justin Trudeau has gone on record to say that. Finally, we are in. We heard from Kevin O'Leary about this new North American economy that he's fostering, and the North American dollar that will allow for free trade between Canada and the United States, and also, well, I wouldn't say free trade, but a unionized economy, as is seen in the European Union, where goods and services are allowed to be exchanged at par. A new American currency is available to all those who qualify. New North American citizenship is available for all those who qualify. It's a greater sharing of goods and services between both borders. although it does threaten a brain drain from Canada, what it will allow for is Americans to get their goods and services from Canada at cheaper rates, but also allow for Canadians to enter the American economy without much red tape. And it's an idea that Trump is floating and starting to warm up to. So, Canada versus Trump. What Trump is really doing? Yes, he's saber rattling, but I think he's raising questions within the Canadian economy, especially and Canadian governmental services as things are in limbo since Mr. Trudeau and his Liberal government will be leaving office within the year, I think. And so changes are to be made. So a few ideas are flowing out there, so that there's a structural change in how we operate with our friends across the border in the longest, pretty much undefended border in the world. And it's an idea as which times have come and changes are needed. And yeah, but the fact of the matter is, I don't think any of our time together and our famous relationship together will change too much. I think Canada and the United States, we enjoy a very generous and kind and peaceful existence with each other, and I don't see that changing so much. It's just that Donald Trump just wants to change the terms of our agreement. Thank you very much for joining me on Talk Live. Go Bills! Do root for them this weekend against Kansas City. We need to get them to a Super Bowl, guys. We really do. I think. Listen, Pat Mahomes is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, but he's got to share the wealth a little bit. And I do hope he does share the wealth with Josh Allen. I'm wishing Josh Allen et al. And the Buffalo Bills all the best as they go forward next week. And it just goes to show that not only are the Bills Mafia loved in Western New York, but as I saw in a YouTube video a few months back, one of the biggest markets for the Bills is indeed Canada. Is indeed their friends to the north, it's the friends to the west, really, across the border in Toronto and the GTA area who flock down in their hundreds of thousands in order to watch Bills games. And it was a time in which, when the Bills were on lean times, they had a group of games in Canada. So they will always have welcomed Canadians over, especially the city of Buffalo and its great people, in order to root on the Bills. And I think it's a symbol of the ongoing great relationship between ourselves and the United States and their sports teams and all things American. And I hope that it continues long into its existence. I think it will. It's just that Donald's just getting a little butthurt that he has to pay a little more for what he wants. Thank you very much for joining me on Talk Live on IG and YouTube. We're going to get out of here right now, just after the 2-hour mark. And we'll be back with another show tomorrow night. So do watch out for that. Do watch out for a topic, Go Bills, and all that. And we'll see you tomorrow on another show. And don't be worried so much about Donald Trump. He was born that night, last night. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon. And good night from Toronto. Thank you very much for joining me on Talk Live on IG, YouTube. Like, subscribe, comment on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Sponsored by Duntalk, DUNTLK.com. This will be uploaded to YouTube right away. So, but if you stay with us this long, thank you very much. And do comment down below on your feelings of Donald Trump and some of the ideas that were shared tonight, because some of them were very good ideas, and this is a very enlightening show indeed. And it just goes to show that Canada is just not about